Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Marshall.
And I'm Eric.
Perfect. Check mark. Ding. Ready?
Yep.
Yeah. Are you?
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 We want to take a moment to tell you about Scotland's Yard. Scotland's Yard mission is that any child fighting cancer in Waterloo region should be able to get the life-saving treatment they need right here at home. This initiative is raising funds to make that happen. It started in the fall of 2021 and already 2.5 million has been raised. Their goal is 50 million over 10 years. This year, Scotland's Yard is holding a fundraiser, which is a classic street hockey tournament for all ages, playing alongside NHL and professional hockey players, led by Ben Chirac of the Detroit Red Wings. Last year was the first time the event was held and over 300,000 was raised. You'll be playing with full rink boards and netting for safety. Certified referees will be officiating each game. Come join the fun and help raise money for a great cause and sign up your team at syhockey.ca. It'll be on August 12th at the Boardwalk, which is on Ira Needles Boulevard in Waterloo. Hope to see you there. Eric Rumpel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
I usually research our guests a little bit, and I started to make some notes about you. I'll show you this.
Oh, a blank page? Nice.
Eric Rumpel with a blank page. Because
Cool.
we've met a few times around town, we'll talk about that, but when I started to research you, I was like, oh, you've done way too much for me to start making notes. You've been busy. You've been up to a lot of things. So I don't really know you, right? We've met a few times. I've threatened that you should come on the podcast, and you threatened back. I already booked it, Sarah. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just excited about inviting you over and over again. You've got this great important title at the City of Kitchener, Arts and Creative Industries Coordinator. Like I said, you've been up to tons of stuff that I want to dive into, but at the same time, every time I run into you, you're like super chill.
Yeah.
You're
it's
just
a
like,
coping mechanism,
is
right?
it?
I think so,
It's
yeah.
like when everybody says to me, how do you do it all? I'm like, I don't know. I just do stuff. Is it all? I just kind of do it. But you're always like, hey, what's happening? It's just nice to see you again. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, make no mistake, I definitely get as stressed out as any other person, but I think I'm good at letting it out in private. Well, for the most part, I've definitely sent my share of emails I wish I hadn't and said the thing I wish I hadn't here and there. But yeah, I think being a bit chilled out is kind of how I try to operate. And
it works for
so
you.
You've seen it. You've seen it in action.
I have. So I've picked up on your the jig is up. I picked up on Eric's vibe on your cover. Mine is usually super chill. Marshall saw me get a little bit angry today because I was just irritated about something, and that's probably the most you'll see. The only time I get like ferociously angry is if somebody's in trouble and you need to like protect them. That's where my like cortisol rush coming from the home I came from comes from. But yeah, I'm usually super chill, and then it just like it surfaces in like either shutdown or like a rash.
Right.
Right. Does this ever happen to you? Do you want to talk on the podcast about your rashes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, I get like an inflammation response to stress.
Same.
So I get like weird, like really sneezy, like face congested days when I got too much going on. And that's often my cue to like eat better, get some sleep,
When did I drink
settle.
water last?
That's right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it's a real like forceful body cue that
Yeah.
I'm not looking after myself properly. The other thing I'm realizing in responding to this too is that I think part of what that is, seeing me as chilled, is because I'm actually like mostly an introvert that can turn on some of the extrovert qualities when I need to.
Samesies.
So usually in a public setting, I'm pretty quiet. I like kind of being off to the side and just checking out what's going on.
This is why I like being behind the camera, behind the microphones, behind the laptop. That's where I'm most comfortable making this stuff, not necessarily putting myself out there in the front, you know?
Yep.
For sure. Yeah.
Yep. That's where I like it.
Yep.
So I'm going to actually ask you a question. This is what I met with Emily, your boss. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that how we refer to Emily?
Yeah.
I met with Emily Robson, your boss, a few months back, and we were trying to get to know each other. And she said, I don't know, let's start in 1991. And I was like, are you serious? She's like, yeah. Let's go back to 1991. I was like, okay, roll up my sleeves. Here we go. In 1991, I was taking care of my nephew. I was going to high school. I was having this job. I was doing this. I was in a band. And then brought her up to date to today. And we didn't have time for her 1991. So we still actually have to meet again so that we can, so I can figure out what happened to Emily's life, moving back all the way to 1991. But let's try that with you. Tell us about your experience. Are you from Kitchener? Where was your high school? What's your experience here?
And what were you doing in 1991?
What were you doing
Yeah,
in
that's what I
1991?
knew that was coming as soon as you started telling us. I'm like, what was happening in 1991? I mean, I would have been in early high school in Newmarket, Ontario at that point in time. What is that? Is that like grade 10 or something like that? 15? I would have been 15 years old. So yeah, I would have been actually I had just moved to a Catholic high school in grade 10 without a Catholic upbringing, largely because I was chasing a girl that I had a crush on.
The best reason.
But I mean, more practically, I had bounced around a little bit. I lived with my dad and we had moved around a bunch, and I just wasn't super into the school I was into for grade 9. So started a new school, and what was I into then? Like basketball, smoking cigarettes, working at a gas station.
Cigarettes.
The Gulf War.
The what? The Gulf War?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Gulf.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I was big into that in 91. Yeah.
I would have been protesting the Gulf War at King and Benton at that age.
Yeah. I mean, that's cloudy.
Yeah.
I'm not pulling much else out of 91 just on the spot like this.
So you've been a magazine editor. You were one of the creators, or the creator of Night Shift. And then sort of from that, got into some festival work and then made your way into the city of Kitchener, right?
I worked as a journalist for almost 15 years, and actually to the point of where we started off, like mostly as an editor. I really preferred kind of being behind the scenes and working in assembly and finding the right people to tell stories. And so I had also been working as a journalist for long enough that I was starting to realize that I didn't really like being in that industry anymore. And I was trying to find a new path at the time, and so I was living in Montreal actually for about a year in 2011, and it was one of a couple of breaks I'd taken from having an editing job, and I was just working as a freelancer, and I was a terrible freelance journalist in terms of generating work. But
And is that because you have to get out there and talk to people and make it happen?
Yeah, well, there are people that are amazing at turning like everything they're doing in their life into a paid story opportunity, right? And I'm not really one of those people. But I could get away with it for a year in Montreal, where it was cheap to live and to do stuff and to eat, and then more practically speaking, I needed to get a job, and I got offered a job as the editor of Alternatives Journal, which is it had been around for like 40 years at that point. It's kind of a hybrid, like academic publication and more sort of environmentally focused, geared towards a broader audience magazine. And I got brought into that job to help rebrand it, essentially. And so came in and applied some of what I'd been able to figure out about how to make magazines over the 10 plus years before that. And one of the elements of that is as we got into producing issues, we were producing themed issues was one of the changes that we made, and we were producing a night themed issue of that magazine. And out of that, we got talking about what could make a great opportunity to celebrate doing this night issue and engage in like 3D in real life with our potential audience and the local audience. The magazine was based in Kitchener, but I don't think a lot of people knew that because it was sort of this weird offshoot of the environmental studies department at the University of Waterloo. And so out of those conversations, this idea for what became Night Shift kind of bubbled up out of that, where we, I think a conversation moved really quickly from, hey, this would be cool to do, to could we do this as a magazine team? And we maybe with about 6 months or so, we just started building momentum, and we had people submitting ideas, and we secured some funding to produce work. And I started working at that time with Emily at the city. It's when I first met her, and worked closely with her colleague at the time, Hillary Abel, as well. And
good friends with Hillary.
Yeah, and the two of them were really fabulous
kind of a dream
work
team
with. Yeah, like it was.
I find Hillary to be like she's got a crank on her back. She's an ideas machine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it just and it was amazing to encounter them in the context of like not really being sure how to do this thing or what it was we were doing, because like every conversation I had with them, they were like, cool, this is how we can make this happen. And they were really empowering and supportive. And, before we knew it, we had produced this sort of a multidisciplinary pop-up art festival that occurred on the night of the clocks rolling back. And the reception to it was really fabulous. A ton of people that came out, and folks were all, talking to me and our team at AJ at the time about, wow, this is the kind of stuff that needs to happen downtown. And the ball rolled from there into continuing to want to produce that event. But it kind of coincided with me hitting my real wall as an editor. And so I left AJ at the time, but decided to continue producing Night Shift as a volunteer. And within a few months of making that decision, I ended up getting a job to fill Hillary's mat leave actually at the city, which was in like a marketing and event production role on the downtown development team. And so that rolled into that. I kind of transferred the what I had learned in a year of making this festival into applying it to producing some other events and just kind of becoming, sort of a booster of downtown and trying to get my bearings there a little bit more and support other folks who wanted to make things happen downtown. Pardon me.
No, that's okay. This is why we edit. Take a second. Take a sip.
No, it's all good.
You're all good?
Okay. Yep. And yeah, that's it. Just kind of it steamrolled into. I spent 2.5 years or so at the city in like filling a couple of mat leaves for Hillary. She had 2 kids, so I filled 2 of her maternity leaves and did another contract in between those, and then eventually got into a full-time role with the city. But I kept producing Night Shift. I did 4 iterations of that. And so after leaving Alternatives Journal and continuing to produce it as a volunteer, I went through the process of establishing a not-for-profit, building an advisory board, and then figuring out how to produce a festival as a side hustle for another few years before I burned myself out on that. And decided it was like it had done what it needed to do, and I definitely didn't have the capacity to keep doing it. So
we have breaking point, right? Like just
Marshall's seen me do that a few times.
I have a friend whose father was a writer and worked for Globe and Mail and National Post and many newspapers, and I always really admired the fact that he just decided one day that and basically ended that writing career with a column on his own terms that said, I've said everything I have to say. I'm done now.
Right.
And just wrapped it up kind of thing instead of waiting to get the boot or something.
Right. Yeah, that's great if you can go out like that.
Mm-hmm. What I want to say was I've seen the inside of a few editing rooms, newspaper editing rooms and magazine editing rooms. And they're exciting to me. One is they're always in a complete state of chaos. And I mean, like I've worked in some messy offices myself as a writer, but like total chaos, as in just everything's piled high to the ceiling kind of thing. And there's stuff everywhere from the past and present, and everything, every inch of the wall is covered. And I figured it's because I haven't worked in that space. I figured it's because it's a total grind, and because it never lets up, and there's never space. That day's never going to come where you can clean that office up, right? Is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, part of what the idea of like the walls being covered really resonates for me, because I mean, I do that now in my space still, just keep putting stuff up, and part of that is kind of earmarking things that you think you're going to need to go back to for some reason. But also, I mean, I think when I worked as an editor, I was really, really interested in working really closely with designers and art directors. Like the editors sort of like work together in their own ways, but I was really interested in working really collaboratively with visual people. I really admired what they did. I really liked the way that they worked. And so I think the whole time I was doing that, I was really also trying to teach myself how to be better at not necessarily always starting a story idea around the written content of it, but like what is this editorial package going to look like, and what is it going to feel like? So
Would I want to read it?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I mean, all that stuff is, help me to establish the story and make an impression about what it is. Or maybe the, artwork itself is the story, and you're just, adding some information to give that a bit more context. And so for me, having visuals up around where I was working really, really, just felt inspiring at a really basic level, but it was just a really nice way to I think keep that focus on how I wanted to work, and to try and help myself generate ideas when you're trying to figure out, okay, like how do I bring this from an early draft of something that we don't really know how we need to accompany what somebody's writing down to tell a story. Just having a bunch of sort of a bit of a visual mess around me was just a nice sort of trigger to get deeper into that sort of impulse, I think.
Every office I've seen from Metroland Media, the editors' offices have the same thing going on. It looks like the whole office is telling the story of what got them and everybody around them right to this point where you're at right now to create this story today. So when you talk about stuff on the wall, I'm talking about how, anyone who's seen a crime drama or a movie knows what it looks like when homicide detectives are working and the walls are plastered in these dark stories and images, right?
Or like when I've had some type of pitch meeting and you walk in and you're
That's
like,
right, Sarah.
oh, Sarah's covered the walls in colored paper.
That's right. Sarah does that too.
It's my daughter, Justina.
But on top
Aspiring
of
artist.
newspaper stories and all that stuff, there's also there's usually toys around, like Homer Simpson. There's awards sitting around, right? Best writer, best newspaper. So there's these celebratory, kind of things validating,
I'm
the work
picturing
that's been
NPR
done.
Tiny Desk concerts. That's what I see when you say that.
Yeah, and then like stacks and stacks of newspapers. Sometimes they're old magazines just stacked up. I have no idea why they're there, but they're from last year, kind of thing.
Yep.
And I always think that'd be a really neat thing for an artist, just to photograph just editors' spaces, because I feel like everything in that space is all pointing like a triangle to the one story you're working on today in this moment, which will be different tomorrow, right?
Right. Yeah. I can definitely identify with that. I mean, less so piles of newspapers and stuff for me, but definitely like, lots of old magazines were always like a component of the piles on my desk. I'm trying to think of objects as you're talking to, and I don't remember anything that I would keep on my desk like that.
Yeah,
but
lots of collectibles I've seen over the years.
Yeah, no, I'm not a huge collectibles guy, so I don't have a lot of that stuff.
Oh, that's the opposite of our Marshall here.
Is that right?
From what I hear,
Yeah.
he's got a lot of collections.
Well, I constantly talk myself out of collecting. I see stuff.
I have some, like the cameras and the records and the guitars.
Can't do that.
But I do relate to like the difference between what Eric's saying as well. Like when I worked an office job, my office had one toy in it. It was one of those Tommy toys. It's like it's got batteries in it, and you click, it's cogwheels. And when you can reposition them and make them do like little mechanical things. I had that up, but there was not a picture of my family or a figurine. I was just like, I want to know that if I just leave here, I can just walk out, and that toy can be somebody else's. Like I can just grab my
that's
backpack
really
and
empowering.
get out.
Right.
I used to sometimes just put a cardboard box on my desk and just be like, maybe they think I'll fill it, maybe they don't.
You must have over the years working with writers. So a story recently came out where I'm quoted in it in a newspaper. I won't go into details. And right off the bat, the writer writes to me and says, "I've been writing this feature for 20 years, and my editors suddenly decide that they're going to just go with last names, as in Ward said, which is what I'm used to, right? Instead of the first name."
Okay.
And this writer says, "I've been doing it this way for 20 years and nobody's touched it. Now somebody's doing it this way," right? Felt the need to communicate that to me, even though I would never have even questioned it. That to me looks like the norm in newspapers. You go with last name unless that person is a family member of yours or a really good friend, right?
Sure.
I've written a bit about Sarah where I've written Sarah said, and the editor changed it to Geidlinger said, right? And just... Okay.
Doesn't feel the same.
It does, kind of loses what the relationship I'm trying to
Totally
be transparent about, right?
Right.
And anyways, how challenging is that to work with writers? I'm not saying that writer challenged the editor, but how challenging is that sometimes to work with writers who feel quite possessive about certain things and challenge you on why you cut something and why you change something?
Yeah, that's such a specialized skill, is like trying to figure out how to if you've received something that is not quite what you were expecting, like that's always a real challenge to figure out how to breach that. I think, I mean, one of the tricks that I wish I could place who I stole it from, but I can't in this moment. But at some point, somebody who is a much more senior editor than me kind of advised me that the best way to start to talk to somebody about changing what they've done is to have a conversation with them about it. In a lot of cases, that's like to try and figure out where the story needs to actually start, because something about the way that its beginning is submitted is just not hitting the mark that you want it to. And I always found doing that was like a great exercise, in that as soon as somebody starts conversationally telling you about what it is that they're interested in or why the story is important, they just very naturally like leap into it at an entry point that feels really true. And is kind of getting into what you're talking about, where there's like this formalism about how you begin a story with a lead and the sort of formula that you run your way through in order to construct it, which will sometimes interrupt that sort of natural flow of why the storyteller thinks something is important, or where it resonates with them, or the moment or person that really isolates what's important about the story. And so I think I used that trick a number of times, especially with folks who really knew what they're doing. And I was intimidated as an editor to be like, hey, I don't think this is right, or I want you to do this instead, is just trying to have a conversation and then allow that conversation to play out. And often that starts to reveal like maybe where some of the restart needs to come from, or
and it takes your narrative off of it and lets them tell it the way it should be told in the first place.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
love it.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the best tricks that I think I learned as an editor is just to like take it off the page, have a conversation about it, and then figure out what you can extract from that conversation to bring it back to the page.
When I'm out in the world doing things, going to things, experiencing art, I see you, I see Vincent Marconi, I see Hilary Abel, I see Misty Brown, I see Emily Robson, I see Caroline Barron, I see us at stuff. Maybe Roshan James. Who else do we see? Steph Butari,
Isabella
Adam
Stefanescu.
Schwartzentruber.
Yep.
Schwartzentruber. I love him. I love you, Adam. Sorry, Schwartzentruber. But I always see you. You're always there. We see Bongishimo. We see Conan Stark. It's a lot to to do the job, and then to go to all events as well. But it's necessary. Tell us about what your work looks like.
I mean, well, it's like nice to hear that. I feel like I actually don't make it to as much stuff as
we do
this.
too. We feel like we miss a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do it all.
No,
which is a great thing about our region.
Totally,
right?
Totally. And I guess like you kind of like get to a point of acceptance with that. With just you can't be at all the things, and also, I mean, even in a position as working for the city within trying to support the arts sector, I mean, I've come to recognize that doesn't mean that I have to be a huge fan of everything that's going on. I can still kind of stick to the things that I'm actually just genuinely interested in as a person, and that's probably that's probably enough things, and which is not to say that there's a lot that I don't want to go to or anything like that. There's just, as you said, there's way too much stuff going on to kind of be present at, and at least in my role, part of the line is like trying to figure out how to not be working in those moments, and it really just depends on the conversations you end up landing in is really what dictates a lot of that. But to your question, what does my work look like?
What does your work look like?
I mean, it's there's always like a lot of different balls in the air. I mean, I can just kind of talk about what I've got going on this week, really, as an example of that. Mm-hmm. Like I've got a jury meeting coming up on Thursday for a public art competition at the new Kitchener Public Library branch in the Southwest that's being built. We've got I've had a jury group that's been looking over proposals to that, and we're working on narrowing down a list to keep moving that process along. We've got an advisory meeting this evening, actually, that we'll go to, and like on my desk itself, I mean, I'm working on some policy development stuff right now. A lot of the city's arts-based policy is stuff that came out a generation ago and hasn't really had a lot of updating, and so
needs fresh eyes.
That's right. Yeah. So we're in the midst of a process where we're really trying to look at those things and trying to figure out how to modernize a few different practices. So I've got some of that kind of more sort of strategic writing and sort of process cerebral work going on. I'm also really close to finalizing a new roster of artists for a project I produce called The Beasting.
We know all about The Beasting.
And I figured we'd probably talk about that.
Yeah.
But like that's been really nice. We did like for the first year we did an open call for applicants to that. So we got through selecting some folks that came through that process last year, and formulating that roster has been a really interesting process the last few years, because it's really this goal to try and bring together a real diverse range of folks who have different backgrounds, different illustrative styles, who are at a different point in their careers, who work in different types of mediums, and so we can start out with a list that would be our perfect 24, but not all those people are going to say yes for sure, and so it becomes this process of sort of figuring it out slowly. But I'm really excited about. I think we're at 20 out of 24 right now, and we start doing production on that next week. So I've been picking up some art supplies and figuring out our production setup for that, and just kind of formalizing the roster out. For that project.
Marshall, you should do a piece of The Beasting.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Doesn't The Beasting need Marshall Ward?
Noted.
Noted. So I'm very familiar with this project. I have played with the Beastagon. I have seen the projection at Lumen. I have been in the space. I went to the Beasting event. I know like a good friend of the podcast, Esther Sanchez, has a piece in the Beasting, and an old guest, past guests, I should say, not old guests. We're old guests. Past guests have been on. But for anyone who doesn't know what the Beasting is, explain, please.
Cool. So it's a blind collaboration challenge that is rooted in the idea of an exquisite corpse, which is a game that was popularized by the surrealists, and it's a game that probably lots of folks have played, where you're in like they would have called it a parlor probably, but a bar. One person starts to draw something on a piece of paper, folds part of it over, passes it to the next person, who continues the drawing without seeing what the other person does. So sort of like an illustrative broken telephone.
Are there a couple lines that carry on into the next piece?
Yeah. So what we do at the Beasting is we've kind of taken that concept and blown it up a little bit, where we give a group of 24 artists. They basically get like a 10-inch by 15-inch piece of illustration board. A tool set of a couple of the like pens with nibs, a selection of markers, some Black India ink, and a few brushes. And they've got about a 4-hour period to do whatever they want to do essentially.
And you're filming this for time-lapse use as well, which I love watching.
Yeah, so we bring them into 44 Gawkel and set them up in a workspace, and we have the workspace set up with just like a iPhone time-lapse capture set up right above where they work. And folks, basically, to your question, Marshall, they just have a couple of like pencil marks where their piece will connect with whatever the pieces are that are around it, and folks get assigned either a head, a shoulders, a pelvis, or a feet section. But really, there's no rules. Like, there's no expectation that if you get a feet section that you have to draw feet. You can do whatever it is that you want, as long as the lines hit the connection points for the other pieces so that they can all go together. And this, I mean, this really, the project got conceived through the course of COVID. So it's really got off the ground as like a digital presentation piece. So we've been mostly using those time-lapse captures and presenting the individual artist's work, but also combining them into these full beast pieces, and mostly sharing that stuff through Instagram and through a website we created called thebeasting.ca. Website called The Beasting. But it's also, you know, as we've sort of come back out of COVID, we've had some great opportunities to share the work physically with folks as well. All of it is on display inside 44 Gawkel, including the works from the first year are all framed and up in there now. We've got a sort of a display, a really unique display that we call the Beastagon, which was built by Boko in New Hamburg.
Adam Schwartzentruber.
Adam Schwartzentruber. And that was a fabulous kind of coming together of Adam and I had a number of conversations. Actually, it was one of the artists in the first iteration of that project, Sean Chappell, who's from Cambridge, who him and I were talking right before he contributed, and he just kind of suggested, you know, it'd be fabulous if you could display this stuff in a way that they're all together and that whoever's looking at them can move them around and pick whatever combination they want. And that idea just like, you know, went really deeply into my brain right away. And as I got thinking about it, the only person I could think of locally who could help me with this idea was Adam, from what I knew
so
of his practice. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Adam and started talking to him about it. And one of the things I love about that process is eventually where we got on exactly the same page at one point after a few conversations trying to sort of figure out where we were going, is I sent him an image of this like paper doll toy that I'd found that you could buy on Amazon or something like that. And I was like, this is what I want, but 7 feet tall. And he was like, all right, I got it.
I know how to build that. Yeah. I love that you snapped your fingers because that's so Adam.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that became how we decided to display the stuff from a given edition of 24 of them, is this 6.5 foot tall Beastagon where you can just spin the different sections around and combine with whatever head you want with whatever shoulders, whatever pelvis, whatever feet.
The moment I saw it, what struck me was how much it made me think about the children's books I grew up with illustrator Dennis Lee and then the writer Frank Neufeld. So Garbage Delight, mm-hmm. Alligator Pie, and Nicholas Knock, and how those illustrations are pretty disturbing. And the poems were too sometimes. Mm-hmm. And some of them were like that. They were compartment. You get like this box with these compartments in it, and one compartment would have like a head. You know what I mean? And mm-hmm. another compartment would have, I don't know, a jar with something weird in it kind of thing.
Right.
Or something kind of abstract. And do
you remember the ones too? These are not the same, but the ones where you would like pull a lever,
yes.
and it was behind cellophane, and it would change the photo. It was like a double wall of sliced paper. It's the best way that I can.
Yeah, exactly.
There's probably a word for this.
Yeah, kind of like a pop-up book, but a bit different that way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And anyways, I remember thinking, oh, this is really interesting because I was so equally attracted and scared of these books as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And yet this is what the Beasting kind of looks like, you know what I mean? Which means inherently some of those artists may have grown up with Dennis Lee's artwork as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or just when given the simple instructions of what this is supposed to be, that's kind of where people go to when it comes to mark making and illustrations, is they go to a kind of a creepier place, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah, well, and I think the context of it being like part of a monster too. I know a couple of contributors have immediately gone to like an idea that their parents scared them with as a kid or something like that, or like, but reached back into their own experience for something from their childhood that was, kind of terrifying and loomed larger than it really was when they were much smaller, and having that be the subject matter that they wanted to explore with the project. So yeah, I think there's like a really interesting balance between that sort of like kid brain and more sort of disturbing aspects of monster or beastdom or whatever it is that's married really nicely in the project.
I'm 13 years younger than my brother David. So
Hi, David.
when I was,
Hi, David.
7, he would have been like maybe 20, hanging out in the rec room of our parents' home. And he wanted to be alone. He didn't want me down there, right?
Sounds about right.
And his comic books were down there. And the way he got me out of there was I'd show up and start talking to him and ask him questions or want to hang out. And he knew exactly the page to pull out because the old comic books from the 70s had this Frankenstein. It was like probably paper, cardboard that you could buy, 7 foot, Frankenstein. It was just Frankenstein looking straight ahead like this. Very simple. And he would go, hey, look over here, and go, Mwah, like this, and he'd open it. And I would tear up the stairs so fast, like 3 stairs at a time, and I would not come back, right? It seemed like there's one of these around somewhere.
Nice one, David.
And I built it up in my head that this was what this looked like over the years. And then when I started looking through my old comics, which were David's comics, this was the tiniest little ad. Like it's laughable. And
It wasn't the ad though. It was David's.
Yeah,
right.
And I'm showing my own kids. I
wizardry.
go, let me show you what I was terrified of as a kid, and the way Uncle David, tormented me with this really tiny ad, right? And it was like so simple. It was like nothing. It was like send 75 cents for a 7 foot Frankenstein, life like Frankenstein,
Right.
something. And anyways, that stuff stays with you, right? And it finds its way into your artwork and your writing and your thinking.
Totally.
And so I think about the Beasting in that way, that it's this incredible collaborations of people's self-conscious and experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even, I know that a number of those pieces were created under some degree of stress too. Like a number of the folks that, when we get them in the room and it's like, here's your illustration board and here's your tools and I'll see you in a few hours.
And we're not living through a pandemic. Have fun. Bye.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Like especially a number of the folks that we've had participate in the project that primarily create digitally. A bunch of those folks are just like, I'm not really, familiar with using these tools you're giving me. This isn't what I usually work with. Yeah. But there's a really nice equalizer in the limitations of the tools and the just black ink, and it's sort of like whatever you end up doing will both work and not work with what everybody else does, and that's part of what makes it work. But I've really enjoyed that the opportunity to sort of be the person that introduces the contributors to what it is they're going to do, and then I'm typically the first person that gets to see what they've done a few hours later and talk to them about it, and because it's usually like quite a journey anyway, from what they're thinking they're going to do or what they don't know what they're going to do as they get in the room to what happens a few hours later.
I think that scary place is where the magic happens. One of my themes of finding joy in the last couple of years. Each artist that I did get a chance to talk to, whether it was at the Beasting event or at Lumen, each one that I had a chance to talk to said to me, I wasn't sure if my piece was going to make sense, or I wasn't sure if it was going to fit, or if I was the right person for it. I'm like, are you kidding? It's because it's different that this thing works, right? But it shows you how much of that fear and in, putting people in this position where they might be a little bit uncomfortable, which is not intentional. It's just sort of what arose from the situation and the time and the place where they got to draw or create what they needed to create. Right. That fear lasted until they could see the finished project and see it projected. Like one of my favorite ways to view the Beasting was the projection on the side of, is it Emmanuel Baptist? Not Emmanuel Baptist.
No, it's not. Is it
Knox
not?
Presbyterian?
Yeah, Knox Presbyterian.
Yeah, so one of my favorite ways to view the Beasting was at Lumen in September 22, and it was projected large scale. I think you worked with Christy for some beautiful, crisp, sharp, wasn't even super low light. The projection looked gorgeous. And it was that large scale of seeing it flip almost like you were using the Beastagon, right?
Right.
And seeing it flip. You guys did such a great job of animating this thing, and you could really see how the more things varied, the more it works.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so that one of the things that was super satisfying about seeing that projected on like a, I don't know, 25 or 30 feet tall on the side of that building is it's just stuff that's captured on a phone in a room by a bunch of people that we've assembled it all together into this puzzle that has a completely different presence than the way it's made, which is a really, really fun component of it too, for sure.
That fear element too that you were talking about, Marshall, with what David was terrifying you with.
Whoa.
there was an artist at Krampus Kindle. Krampus, what was the scary one?
Krampus Kindle.
Krampus Kindle, yeah.
There was an artist at Krampus Kindle named Camilla.
Yep.
I can't. Her last name is. I've got it in front of me.
Yeah,
Mlinarczyk.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Camilla Mlinarczyk.
I think you got it. Yeah.
Woodedwoods.com.
Yep. Wooded Woods. Yep.
So a lot of her art, Marshall and I had been talking about, includes very gory, disturbing illustrations of Sesame Street characters. Marshall and I have a deep love for Sesame Street. It shows in our logo. It shows in the things we talk about. It's part of who we are. And when Camilla was describing, I said, wow, like, what is this? When she's describing to me, she said, they emigrated here. She and dad came first. Mom followed later. She was torn away from her mom at a very young age. I know I've invited her to the show. We should let her tell the show herself, or tell the story herself. But what ended up happening was she was completely displaced and put in front of Sesame Street for some time of the day, like we all were at that age. That's probably why we have a love of it. And what transpired were these horrific nightmares of this new life with Sesame Street and this, unbearable pain of being torn from her mom and her childhood home. Right.
Yeah.
So they're such dark images. And did you see some of these? There's like, Big Bird with limbs cut off and Oscar doing something completely inappropriate in the street, just the ways that we don't normally see these characters, but that's all coming from that fear place as well. But she talks about these illustrations like, with love, right? She's like, I'm just illustrating these nightmares that I had. And isn't it interesting that these things happen? So sometimes in those very scary places is where the magic happens for us to create.
Yeah. Camilla is incredible too, for being able to capture that, the like discomfort, or I'm not sure if that's strong enough of a word, but like just the discomforting elements of the things she's capturing, but it's all like so charming also. And it's like, it's a really, really incredible balance that she's able to strike in everything that she does. And she's got a book also that she just produced, which is,
I'm waiting for it. Yeah. It's gorgeous. It's something like, whenever I can be myself when everyone I know is dead.
I think that's right. Yeah.
What a title.
Yeah.
My wife just told this story to our kids. We're 20 and 16 now, about how when she was a little girl growing up in Montreal, it was incredibly exciting that the choir she was a part of was going to sing with Bob McGrath from Sesame Street. He was coming.
Okay.
And her only memory of it was, and she's told them this, was how angry he was the whole time. He was very angry. He was yelling.
Don't meet your idols.
Yeah, he was.
Oh no.
He was just yelling at people and just the whole time. And she said, it was so. She was so upset that's Bob,
right,
from Sesame Street,
right?
And
this is my friend Greg was on Sesame Street in Montreal as well. I wonder if they must have done a bunch of production.
Maybe,
there.
yeah. And anyways, and if you read about the history of Sesame Street, there's some dark things that happened over the years, and the character played David, his struggles and things like that. And I think those are important things to know about and to think about. And in this artist's case, explore, even though they don't conjure up, pleasant images and, but they can still be beautiful and incredibly meaningful and really get people thinking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it's a real COVID thing, but one of the things my partner and I ended up saying to each other a lot was that everything is marbled, and just whenever there are good things and bad things that are happening that are contained in the same experience, the same output of something, whatever it may be. And
Multiple things can be true at once.
that's right. Yeah. Like it feels like, I mean, to me, that's part of what makes artwork more genuine, as if there's a balance of those things that you can see in it, as opposed to, something that doesn't really acknowledge the dark alongside the light, for lack of a better way of saying it.
I was talking to my brother this weekend. We were talking about
Hi, David.
a memory of our father's 1961 Chrysler Imperial.
Oh, because artist Megan Skelton, who we talked to, painted one, and that reminded you of the memory,
That's right. Yeah. And I was sharing with him my memory of the day that my father went out and smashed it up because he was drinking and driving. And the way I hold that memory is I felt like I had this good understanding of what that day looked like for him and what that meant for that car to be smashed up. But David actually said, he's 13 years older than me and has a much broader perspective on things. And he said, that car stopped meaning much to him years before when big changes happened in his life and he experienced huge loss and adversity. So not only did he no longer really care about that car as much anymore, he didn't care about his train set. He didn't care about working and making things in the workshop. He didn't care about his hobbies. His whole life changed, right? Years before. And he said how, so the loss of that car, while that would have been a tough day, he said, I don't think our father had any problem just passing it on to somebody else. He said he paid $190 for it originally. And he said, so he goes, so that meaning you put on that car getting smashed up kind of lives on in I guess a perspective that I came up with,
Like if you both wrote the memoir of your house on Talbot Street, they'd look very different.
Yeah. And it's really neat. Sometimes siblings can fill in pieces of a puzzle that you didn't realize had pieces missing. Right. And you never look at those things the same again. Right. And anyways, that's what I find so fascinating about something like the artist exploring their childhood, and I know Caroline Verne at the City has done incredible work, paintings and caustics, because she explores the cultural duality of leaving Poland at the age of 12 and coming to Canada,
Right.
and painting her memories.
Like Camilla.
Yeah, and then questioning later of how accurate are these memories even, you know what I mean? How much of me has changed since I've come to Canada? And when I go back to Poland, why do things look so different, right? And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts about artists who have left someplace, whether out of necessity or because their family decided to leave. And I imagine you've seen that in lots of artwork and writing. You've encountered that cultural duality and self-exploration of time and place.
Yeah, there's something really incredible about processing those things that way, as opposed to just being on a loop in your head. And just finding a different way of expressing those ideas, or even just having a touch point with them, or whatever it may be. However you need to turn it over time. I mean, it just feels so much healthier than like being stuck on the same thought process or the same interpretation or whatever it may be. So I think folks who've been able to develop that kind of practice for themselves in order to just meet those experiences where they are, they're doing it right. It feels like to me,
David also talked to me about how I've always been really interested in people who seem to have a really healthy grasp on their own mortality. And David, who's in his 60s now, was telling me, he goes, I averaged out the age of our parents, and I thought about health, I thought about genetics and our relatives. He goes, I figured out I might have maybe something like 18 or 19 years left kind of thing.
Right.
And he said that he was...
I know someone that does this too.
Yeah, and he was asking himself. So when negative voices come into his head, he thinks to himself, why the heck am I listening to those voices? I don't want to listen to those for the next 18 years, 19 years. Right?
Oh, I love that perspective. That's fantastic.
It's kind of like not listening to them anymore.
Yeah.
If I only have so much time here left, they can get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you need some kind of tool to battle yourself, right? Or whatever it may be. So if it's that, or whatever you might make to contend with things, it's great.
Kind of brings our conversation full circle when you're kind of, I guess, joking with us about coping and stuff like that. And
it's no joke.
No,
we laugh about it.
What's disappointing, I talked about with Sarah sometimes, is how
It's disappointing when you talk to Sarah sometimes. Is that what you just said?
That is what he just said.
Yeah.
That's true.
I had to highlight
What
it.
did I say?
I'm twisting it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Anyways, I will have read something that Sarah shared with me, or just through conversation, and you feel like you have a better, deeper understanding of something, and yet in a very short time, you slip right back into doing something that you shouldn't be doing.
Are you
Right.
talking specifically about the self-help books that we've been
Yeah,
sharing?
yeah, for sure. It's like it all makes perfect sense, and I close it up. I'm like,
Oh,
wow.
well, I got that.
Yeah, I got that, and that's like a light going on in my head, and
Yeah.
I get it, right? And
Yeah.
then 2 weeks later, you see yourself basically
Yeah.
the same words are coming out of your mouth,
Yeah.
the same
Right.
self-destructive, self-loathing words are here again. It's like, what happened there? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did happen there? Yeah.
Well,
It's hard wiring. It's really hard to reverse. It's moving
Right.
from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, right? It's not just, you're not 5 years old and formative, or pre 5 years old and formative. It's, you really got to work on it. It doesn't just come so easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that life in working with visual artists and writers and stuff like that, is it all intertwined, or do you separate them in a way?
No, it's intertwined for me. I mean, I think that, so I think what happened for me is I was, you know, kind of, I was falling out of, I don't want to say love, that's too strong, but I was falling out of interest with working in sort of the field of producing magazines, which was, you know, I really loved magazines growing up. That's kind of what drew me to that in the first place. And I think after a few years of being involved with magazines, trying to figure out how they have a presence online and how they make a voice for their users and their audience with it, and doing all these things, I was really recognizing that we're reaching this point where as a journalist, I'm competing with everybody out there who has a computer or a device or the ability to tell a story visually or in writing. And so I was really interested in, you know, trying to take what I had figured out how to do in that space and apply it to other things. And I know when I was making the transition, one of the things that I repeated over and over to myself, I think was, or at least in conversation with other folks, was about that I was just reapplying a lot of the same organizational and like curation and just kind of general interest skills to 3 dimensions, as opposed to being contained to a page, whatever that might look like. And that felt like a really like it was a really well-timed and empowering change for me, and that, you know, trying to move into producing events and doing these other things that I didn't really have any experience doing. I was just falling back on all the same skills that I'd been cultivating, which were around, you know, trying to recognize, oh, this fits well with this, and this is really interesting. This thing that this person is really interesting is this thing that a person is doing that is really interesting is interesting because of X factor, or it fits with a context or a space or whatever it is. Like, it was just it became a process of just kind of trusting my own instincts and trying to be organized about how I went about doing something with those instincts. And, you know, I didn't go to school for journalism either. I kind of got into it through an internship early on. And so I always felt that I operated quite instinctively through my career in that realm. And then getting into working with other types of artists and in other types of contexts and in 3-dimensional spaces, you know, that gave me a really new life, I guess, in terms of what I thought I could do for a career.
When you're talking about all those pieces coming together, and that the interests connect with other interests, and all of a sudden you end up creating this, you know, vibrant, beautiful connection in the city. Like we have been fortunate enough to connect people through Bonn Park podcast, been connected to other people, you know, watch them take an idea and fly with it. And, you know, it's all we had to do is say, oh yeah, meet so-and-so. We think that they're doing something that you're going to be really interested in. And it kind of brings me back to that toy I was talking about in my old sad office, this Tommy toy, which it's the cogwheels that are battery powered. One's battery powered and you push them all together. Well, sometimes if you don't have them quite pushed far enough, they'll just skip. Mm-hmm. But when you push them all together, it's like ka-chunk, and they all start moving beautifully together. And that's basically what your work does. Yeah. Right? It's making sure
hopefully
everyone can reach each other so that you can keep creating.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, When I started to move into event production, I mean, really, I was relatively new to Kitchener. I'd been around for maybe about a year, and I had this new job that I was working really hard on, and I had a few friends sort of in the periphery of that work, but I didn't really know anybody, and so a lot of starting to get into that kind of work was me realizing like I need to meet more people and like and reestablish some roots in this place that I've moved to. And the idea of an event or a happening or something just became kind of my excuse to get in a bunch of doors to talk to people. And I mean, I guess part of what I took away from that is sometimes it's that simple, right? Like, I mean, you've got an idea, and it's a matter of meeting the right person who's going to steer you towards the person who is a great fit for something you're interested in. And so, I mean, it was a really sort of empowering transition for me out of one industry and into another, because it was really based on just like not being afraid to talk to people, which is like a really easy thing to fall into when you're new to a place, you don't really know anybody, you don't know what's going on, and you're an introvert. Yeah, totally. So it became this, this sort of this process that I developed for myself in order to, not just be hanging out by myself in my apartment as much as I was at the time.
Bonn Park is made possible with the support of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, the Kitchener Public Library, our local sponsors, and you, our loyal listeners.
We make this show in Sarah's kitchen. If you like it, please rate and subscribe.
That helps us get the word out to more listeners.
The Bonn Park theme song is by Alan Lung. Sarah and I are super excited for season 4 and all the amazing shows we're going to bring you.
We're also really excited about our secret side podcast called An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. And it's not actually about wrestling.
No, it isn't. It's about a lot of things.
Mostly life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of laughter.
Yeah, there's tons and tons of laughter.
We're incredibly proud of it. So please check it out on all your streaming platforms. An unscripted, I can't say it. Can you say it?
An unscripted spectacle, wrestling with wrestling. Meow, meow, meow.